About a ride. She glanced over and saw Ed, she said, speaking the truth. Out the window of the store. She figured he must have got held up. Come on, honey, Eddie said, his voice shaking slightly. For the first time, she really took notice of him. His nose was running and his eyes were watery. She knew at once that he was sick, but for $100. So she had decided that must come to a stop. He was nothing to her, so it wasn't her problem trying to help him keep up his habit. That's funny shit. You act like I done did something to you, he exclaimed loudly. It ain't that, Eddie. It's just that I ain't got no money to give you. Stop by until Friday when I get paid, so I don't need you, man, she stated coldly, looking him in the eye. For a minute he was surprised. Then anger took over. He had depended on her to get his fix money, and now the silly young bitch was coming down on him. He grabbed at her, only to find a switchblade knife descending on his arm, and he just barely snatched his arm back in time. Now he was really mad. Fool-ass young bitch, he snarled angrily. You damn near cut me, he said. If you put your hands on me, I am going to cut you, she answered him honestly. Before the words were out of her mouth, his hand flashed out and he slapped her viciously across the face. His hand was a blur as he slapped her again. Then when she attempted to bring up the knife, he knocked it from her hand. He stepped in close and slapped her viciously until her head rocked on her shoulders. She tried to scratch him, but he was too swift for her. Tears of anger flowed down her cheeks as she tried to fight him back. When he demanded the money, she cursed him harshly. He slapped her again. Suddenly, he was gone, and she fought back the tears so that she could see. Chink had him by the back of his neck, then spun him around and smashed a huge fist into Eddie's face, again and again. The fight was as lopsided as her effort had been against Eddie. Eddie didn't stand a chance. Sandra had never seen Chink angry, and now she hoped she never would again. He moved with the swiftness of a hunting cat. His strength was buoyant. Chink couldn't have explained to himself the rage that overcame him when he drove up and saw Eddie slapping Sandra around. This slim girl was the only thing he cared for in the whole fucking world, and he had known in that minute he'd die before he'd allow anyone to harm her. He had burst from his car like a mad bull, goaded beyond any thought but to kill that which offended him. As Eddie slumped to his feet, Sandra grabbed one of Chink's arms and tried to drag him away from the bloody bundle that lay at his feet. But Chink's arm was like a band of steel. Her small strength was nothing, and he didn't even feel her pulling on him. It took 4 men who had come up to watch the fight to get him off of Eddie, and they had a job of holding the young boy back from killing the older one on the ground. Chink! Chink! She screamed and threw herself into his arms, fixing her small body against his so that he couldn't help but notice who it was. Sandra was as tall as Chink, but that was where the comparison ended. For a brief minute he almost tossed her away from him, but she clung to him. Her arms were locked around his muscular neck, and as he rocked his wide body back and forth, she was swung almost off her feet. But she held tightly. He was like an enraged grizzly bear, but somehow she managed to get him back to his car. We gotta leave, baby, she said over and over again. The police will be here in a minute, and we don't need that. She pushed him into the car and ran around and jumped in the other side and started the motor. He had been giving her driving lessons in the evenings, so she could handle a car quite well. Sandra drove over to her house and took him upstairs with her. She led him into her bedroom as if he was a child, and as they sat down on the edge of the bed, His huge frame shook from the passion that he had just been filled with. Sandra leaned over and kissed him tenderly. His arms encircled her until she believed she was held in a vice. He kissed her slowly, tenderly at first. Then she returned his kisses until they found themselves making love. It was the first time for her, and she cried out. But he was so tender that she stretched to meet his every move until they were as one. They made love the rest of the evening and through the early morning until Sandra heard her mother come in, drunk. She didn't bother to get up, and neither did he. She lay in his arms until the sharp light from her door opening caused them both to roll out of the bed. "Whore! No good, bitch!" her mother screamed at her drunkenly from the doorway. She yelled for her boyfriend to come in. "Kick that punk out of here," she ordered as her companion came into the bedroom behind her. By this time, Sandra had quickly dressed. "He ain't throwing nobody out," Sandra stated quietly. "I paid the fucking rent on this place for the past 3 months now, so ain't nobody that I like gonna get tossed out." "Bitch, you ain't but 15 years old. You don't order nobody around in here. I says who's gonna come in and who's not," her mother replied. She stepped forward to slap Sandra, but found herself staring at the switchblade knife her daughter held. "Ain't gonna be no slaps either," Sandra stated harshly. "'Cause if you put your drunken hands on me, I'll cut your goddamn throat." Her mother stared at her, speechless. She didn't know what to say, but she wasn't drunk enough to run up against the knife her daughter held. "I'm gonna call the police and have this nigga here put in jail for rape," she finally managed to say. "I'll fix his little red wagon first, then I'll have your ass put in juvenile until you get some sense." "And if you do," Sandra stated coldly, "there won't be nobody to pay your rent for you." Her words stopped her mother in her tracks. She had become too accustomed to having her daughter pay the rent. Chink removed a large bankroll from his pocket and tossed $80 on the bed. "There's this month's or next month's rent. I'll stop by and pay your rent each month. But Sandra is moving out of this flat. If you want the money, it's yours. If you want to go to the police, it's up to you. But you won't get a penny if you do." Greed flashed across the mother's face. Her eyes went to the money on the bed, then back to the young couple. "Well now," she said, "if you get into any trouble, I'm just gonna say I don't know nothing about it, that's all. Don't come begging me to stick my neck out if something happens. And I expect you to bring me that rent money on the 1st of every month, 'cause I needs it." She picked up the money, then added, "This is just enough for me to catch up on my back rent, so I'll be expecting some more on the 1st. She glanced at her daughter, then dropped her eyes, because both of them knew it was a lie. Sandra didn't have any suitcases, so she put her clothes in brown shopping bags. Chink helped her carry everything to the car. He was so happy he couldn't believe it was really happening. Sandra was just as surprised. It had all happened so sudden. At 3 o'clock in the morning, she found herself moving out on her own. But for some reason, with Chink beside her, she wasn't frightened of the move. It seemed as if it was all to the better. They checked into a motel for the rest of the morning. And the next day, Chink went out and found a dope-fiend couple who rented an apartment for them. Chink paid 3 months in advance on a modern apartment on the west side of Los Angeles. Since they had the car, they didn't have any problem getting back and forth to school. Since he was 16, Chink wanted to quit school. But Sandra raised so much hell about it, he decided to stay on, and their days in high school passed quickly. As time wore on, each became more dependent on the other. For Chink, Sandra was his world. Everything he did was for her. The same way. She went out of her way to cook good dinners for him. One
place, yeah? The rescue unit's freeing civilians right now.
Get down, people!
On the ground!
Get ready for action! Move it.
Got it!
So what? I only get to use it one time?
Okay, find Santa and free him.
Shit! A taser!
That's crazy.
I got the taser.
Bulldozer spotted!
You're my call.
I don't got no difference.
Don't hold back. Give him a good smack. I hit some coke and shoot. Yeah. We're fucking immortal.
That's somebody out there that called.
Oh, fuck all of you.
A lot of motherfucking cook, but I don't. It's just me. I don't be doing that cooking up the ass. Myself.
Open my store in county!
Come on. Compute with a computer. Will the door open and get like a king? Show back.
was in the kitchen getting it right for him. He had stopped her from stealing from the stores, and now he bought all her clothes. He still sold dope every day, and his income was fairly large for a young couple. He bought a later model car, which was the beginning of the end. It drew attention to the young couple when they went to school. Now the teachers even whispered about them as they passed in the hallways together, dressed, and when they went to the lunchroom, wanted without concerning themselves about the car. The other kids talked, and soon everybody in the school knew that they lived together. Spring had just begun. They had passed the winter together with no problems, and now that Sandra was 16, they didn't think they had anything to worry about. Chink stopped Sandra on the way to the lunchroom. "I gotta run home for a minute, baby, and pick up some more stuff. You want to ride with me or go ahead and eat?" he asked her during their lunch break. "No, honey, I'm starving. I think I'll go ahead and eat. I'll see you when you get back," she answered quietly, then smiled at him. She couldn't have realized that it would be quite a while before they would meet again. Chink had only a half hour, so he left in a hurry. On the way back from the apartment, he had a flat tire, so he left the car and caught a cab. As soon as the cab pulled up and he got out, detectives seemed to come out of the ground. He tried to swallow the dope, but he had too many balloons on him. The school kids sitting by the window saw it all. Chink went down under a flood of white and black detectives as they tried to reach him before he could swallow the stuff. He fought back, striking out with his huge arms. He broke a white detective's nose and blood gushed out as he screamed in pain. Another officer took his place and went down just as quickly. "Pin his arms!" someone yelled, as the men scrambled around trying to hold tight to the struggling boy. One detective pulled his gun. "Step away from the black bastard," he roared loudly, pointing his gun at the struggling group. By this time, the fighting group of men was surrounded by kids that had run out of classrooms to see the fight. "Don't shoot him, you no-good bastards!" one of the braver kids yelled. "You got 10 men! Ain't that enough to take one little black boy?" And indeed it was enough. Now the detectives put their billy clubs to work, and Chink went down to stay, with his head bloody. The men rolled him over on his back and handcuffed him roughly. "That's one black bastard that's a bull," one of the white detectives said, giving a compliment but still stepping on the toes of the black officers who were beside him. "What about the girl?" one of the detectives asked. "She's probably still in school," a black officer answered. "We can walk in and pick her up now," he said, and started off, followed by 3 white detectives. When the school bell rang, Sandra left her class, not aware of what had happened outside the school. When she passed 2 white men in the long hallway, she took them to be school teachers. If she had bothered to glance behind her, she would have seen the men turn and start to follow her. She stopped at her locker and put her books up. Before she could close it, a black hand reached over and held it open. "What's the idea, man?" she asked, without bothering to glance up to see who it was. "We want to see what you have in your locker," the man answered. This time she did glance up. Her senses reeled and spelled out police as she noticed the well-dressed black man leaning over her shoulder. Her glance quickly took in the white man next to him. Then she turned and saw the other one. "Damn, man," she exclaimed, fighting for time. She didn't have anything in her locker, but she hesitated anyway, trying to figure out what was happening. Her slight hesitation made the officers think she had something to hide. One of them shoved her roughly out of the way. She struck her back on the handle and cursed loudly. "You white bastard!" she swore. One of them asked. "Well, we know she's in it up to her neck with him, so take her down too," another one ordered. And as they led her out of the school, the teacher stood around helplessly and watched. Not one asked what the problem was. The rough handling of the girl meant nothing to them as long as they weren't involved. The black teachers who watched shook in their shoes because they knew what the white police thought of all of them. They could and would be handled the same way if they so much as opened their mouths. As the police passed, they each gave them a wide smile, as if they had just arrested some notorious criminal instead of a 16-year-old girl. They led Sandra out to the police car, and when she saw Chink in the back seat, handcuffed and bleeding, her heart turned to stone. One of the officers spoke to her. "Isn't this your boyfriend?" he asked harshly, trying to make his voice as cold as possible so that he would frighten her. But instead of frightening her, it only made her grit her teeth in anger. The sight of Chink had been enough. Now the detective's voice on top of it filled her with unreasoning anger. If his voice had been harsh, hers was chilling when she deigned to answer. "If you mean honky, do I give him some pussy every now and then? That's our business. Ain't got nothing to do with no peckerwood." The young white detective was shocked, and his face showed it. One of the other white officers stepped up, thinking that he had to protect their image in front of the school kids who stood around. He couldn't allow no black kid to talk to them in that manner in front of such a large group of people. One of the black detectives had to fight back a smile. He had known it was coming. He could tell from the shock in her eyes when she saw her boyfriend in the car. He realized she was angry and would say just about whatever came into her mind and damn the consequences. "You're a smart black bitch, ain't you?" the older officer said as he stepped up and slapped her. The only mistake he made was slapping her instead of using his fist, because the slap didn't even turn her head. She brought her knee up so fast he didn't even realize it was coming until pain exploded in his nuts and he folded up like a used bag, crying out in pain. Now all the hours Chink had spent teaching her how to protect herself came into use. She moved coldly, as if she was standing outside herself. She didn't think she could win, but she could hurt this one white bastard in front of her. She moved so fast she took the officers by surprise. Knocking his hat from his head, she grabbed a handful of hair and pulled his head toward her knee. She caught him in the middle of the face with a brutal, powerful blow that splattered blood over both of them. His head shot back as if his neck had broken, and before they could reach her, she kicked him in the face again, breaking his nose.
Let's find it now.
They moved on her then, coming from all sides. Chink, watching from the back seat of the police car, cried out in his helplessness. To the white officers who rushed at her, she was not a young black girl anymore, a schoolgirl at that. She was just someone black who had found the nerve to strike back at them. They couldn't tolerate it and they rushed her with billy clubs, striking each other in their hurry to strike her. She went under them, holding her head for protection, until one well-placed blow to sleep. Then she didn't feel the other blows that rained down on her prone body. Chink, in his blind rage with his hands cuffed behind his back, tried to butt his way out of the car, until one of the uniformed cops in the car caught him behind the ear with his club. As Chink sank down on the floor of the car, the cop spoke to his partner. I know how the poor bastard must feel. If it was my old lady out there, I'd want to kill the whole fucking bunch of them. Okay, she's out, one of the black detectives yelled, and pushed white detectives out of the way. The murmurings from the crowd of school kids brought them back to their senses, and to avoid a riot, they controlled themselves. As the detectives tossed her unconscious body into the car beside Chink, one of the white detectives muttered, "They ain't no better than a couple of damn animals the way they act." "No better," one of his friends commented. "That's all the fuck they are, is animals." The black officer who had been responsible for the arrest glanced at the two white officers who were speaking. He noticed the $39 washable suits both men wore, then glanced into the car at Chink, who wore $50 pants and a pair of alligator shoes that must have cost $100. For the first time, he was ashamed that he was responsible for the arrest of the young couple. He knew just about everything there was to know about them. He wondered idly if the white cops who called them animals could have come from such hardships as children and survived as well as this young couple had. No, he doubted seriously if either one would have been able to pull himself up out of the ghetto as they had been trying to do. Chapter 5. Sandra walked around the apartment aimlessly. The past few weeks had been a nightmare come true. But now it was over. She had finally been released on probation for striking an officer, while Chink had been sent to juvenile until he became 18. Well, it wasn't too bad, she told herself, for the 1000th time. It could have been worse. They had tried to pin something on her, but it had been impossible, because she had never made a sale nor ever handled any of the dope. So eventually they had to let her go. That she worked every day went in her favor. But from the small taste of law she had seen, she didn't want any more of it. For a black person to become involved with the law was trouble, spelled with large letters. It didn't make any difference if you were guilty or not. If you were black, that was good enough to find you guilty. Well, she decided, she wasn't in any bad shape. She had over $1,000 in cash money, plus there was over $1,000 worth of dope stashed around the apartment. The dope, she decided, would have to be left alone until she could figure out some way of moving it. It wouldn't be that much of a problem, though. If she could get in touch with the right drug addict, then the problem would solve itself. The common sense told her to take her time and use some kind of caution. It would work out better in the long run. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, taking Sandra out of her daydreams. She peeped out the window before opening the door. Hi, George. Betty. Sandra spoke politely as the couple came into the apartment. As she closed the door behind them, she wondered idly what could they possibly want. Ever since the day Chink had used them to purchase the apartment for them, she hadn't seen them, except for one other occasion when they had come by and tried to buy some dope from Chink. She remembered his anger. He had gone into a rage because they had come to his home on such an errand. If there was one thing he didn't do, that was sell dope from his home. And the only reason they knew where he really stayed was because he had had to use them to get the apartment. Have a seat, Sandra offered as she waved her hand in the general direction of the couch. George was a tall, dark-complexioned addict with a scar on the side of his face, while his woman, Betty, was just the opposite of him. She was light-complexioned with a blonde wig. Where he was tall, she was short and stocky. Her mouth was large, while her eyes had a dazed look about them, as if she was tripping out on LSD or something. We was wondering, George began, since Chink got busted, if we could talk from you. He raised his hand before she could interrupt. I remember what Chink said about coming over here trying to talk, but since he's busted, I kind of thought that you might be handling the stuff yourself, maybe. He stared at her closely, his eyes never leaving Sandra's face. Well, first of all, Sandra replied, I ain't dealing no stuff. She hesitated slightly, then added, but there is a few drugs left. I was thinking about getting in touch with you to see if you wanted to handle it because I don't have Chink's Connect. She stopped suddenly, then corrected herself. George, if by chance you would want to handle the little bit of stuff I got and help me get rid of it. She shrugged her shoulders and was so involved with what she was saying that she didn't notice the gloom that came into George's eyes at the mention of his handling some drugs. How much stuff do you have? He asked, not able to conceal the greed in his voice. A warning bell went off in Sandra's head. She studied him closely, then asked quickly, well, how much stuff did you come to buy? She had a sudden inspiration and added, you just might be purchasing all the stuff I got. She couldn't help but notice the way his shoulders dropped at her words, as if she had knocked out his main daydream. Oh, he said dejectedly. We didn't want to buy but a $25 spoon. He hesitated, then continued. I know that won't wipe out your supply. At least I hope it don't. No, I don't think that will wipe out my supply, Sandra replied, putting him at ease. You excuse me for a minute? She added, then walked off to the bedroom. She removed the dope from the toe of one of her shoes and counted out the balloons. It was a good thing that Chink had already mixed and measured out everything, she reasoned, as she counted out 9 $25 balloons. For a moment, she wondered if she was doing the right thing. George and his woman were the only addicts that she really knew, so it didn't leave her too much of a choice. Oh well, she reasoned as she walked back into the living room. She didn't have that much to lose. If they didn't return with the money, the loss of the dope wasn't that much, as far as she was concerned. She still had 22 more balloons left, and the sooner she got rid of them, the better off she'd feel. Here, George, she said, handing him the dope. There's 8 $25 balloons there, plus the one you just bought. Sandra waited until George had counted out the bags of dope she had dropped in his hand. It's $200 worth of stuff there, George, but all I want for it is $125. You'll make $75 out of it, she added. Shit! He exclaimed loudly. It ain't really enough dope here for me to start dealing. By the time people get the wire that I've got some stuff, I'll be out of it. He lifted his eyes up and stared at her closely. You mean to tell me that this is all the dope you got? He asked harshly. For a brief second, Sandra was startled by the tone of voice he used. Then she pulled herself together. It ain't none of your business how much stuff I got, George. But if you don't think I've given you enough to handle, just give it back. Ain't nobody twisting your arm making you sell it. I told you from the start that I didn't have that much. Now, if you want to down it for me, cool. If you don't, that's cool too. Her voice hadn't risen, but there was a firmness in it that couldn't be ignored. From the way George tightened his fist with the dope in it, there was no doubt that he wanted the dope and had no intentions of giving it back. As Sandra examined him, she began to really doubt her actions. She knew at once that she had made a mistake giving the drugs to George. She tried to straighten it out. When I went up and saw Chink last weekend, he suggested that I offer you the chance of getting rid of the few bags that I got. He wants me to bring the money up and put it in his account. So you do what you want. I'm only carrying out his order. At the mention of Chink's name, George's face changed. There was little doubt about it. The man was afraid of Chink. How much time did you say Chink was doing? He asked suddenly. I didn't say, she replied quietly. But if you want to really know, I'll gladly tell you. He's got to stay in jail until he turns 18. His birthday is in February, so I believe he'll go to the parole board sometime this year. More than likely 6 months from now. She knew she lied, but from the facial expression George made, she deemed it well worthwhile. If George had any intention of putting shit on her for the money, he'd have second thoughts about the matter now. But to put your mind at ease, George, whenever you get rid of that dope I gave you, I'd still have enough to give you another bag. As the words Sandra spoke penetrated his scheming mind, George smiled. As long as he knew there would be some more dope waiting whenever he got rid of this small amount that she had given him, he could get his game together. He didn't have any intention of ever bringing her all her money. All he had to do was figure out a way to get the rest of the stuff from her. Since it ain't but a small amount of dope, Sandra, I don't see why you don't just give it all to me now. That way, I won't have to be rushing over here trying to catch up with you when I run out. If I had all the dope, you wouldn't have to worry about the police coming in on you and finding something either. For the first time since entering the apartment, Betty spoke up. Yes, indeed, Sandra. The best thing you could do would be to give all that shit to George. That way you won't have no worry. I'll bring you the money over as soon as George gets rid of the jive. In the silence that followed, you could hear the wind blowing outside. The tree branches could be heard as strong winds rocked them back and forth against the building. Sandra watched the scheming couple closely. She felt like she was being enclosed with two snakes. I would if I could, George, but you wouldn't want me to go against Chink's order, would you? Every time she mentioned Chink's name, there was a noticeable change in George. This time, sweat broke out on his forehead. He glanced at his woman, then asked, Well, Sandra, since we'll be only doing business with you, Chink wouldn't even have to know, now would he? He winked at her, as if they were plotting something together. Oh, yes, Sandra answered quickly. I don't never do nothing against what Chink has said. Right now, I'm wondering if I should tell him about this conversation when I go up to see him this weekend. There was no way for him to hide his fear now. His knees started to shake uncontrollably. Don't do that, honey. I mean, I just mentioned it, that's all. We'll do it just like Chink wants, yeah. Just the way he wants it done. I was just offering my opinion, that's all. 20 minutes later, Sandra was rid of them. She sighed with relief after they left. It had been a mistake to give them as much dope as she had, but it was too late to worry about it now, she reasoned. After taking a hot shower, Sandra went to bed and sleep came slowly. She tossed and turned most of the night until the early morning traffic could be heard. Then she suddenly fell asleep. She slept soundly until a loud knock awakened her. She sat up and rubbed her eyes. She didn't have the slightest idea of who it could be. After all, no one really knew she stayed there. She slipped a light green wrapper around her transparent nightgown and went to the door. She glanced out the window first, and the sight of George standing there only angered her. She snatched the door open and demanded sharply, "What the—" That was as far as she got. Two other men pushed into the apartment. They had been concealed by staying close to the wall. The only way she could have seen them would have been to open the door and stick her head completely out of it. The taller of the pair waved a gun at her. "Just shut your mouth, sister, and you ain't got to worry about getting hurt." Sandra backed up until she felt the coffee table strike her in the back of the leg. Then she stopped and stared at the gunman. The tall one was dark-complexioned with a nervous twitch in his left eye. She kept staring at it, and it seemed to jump every minute. The other man, who only had a knife, was short and stocky, brown-skinned, and with a heavy black mustache. The men didn't pay any attention to George after pushing him into the apartment. Their complete attention was directed at her. The tall gunman advanced on her. "We don't want to give you no trouble, little sis, so just tell us where the dope and money is and you won't get hurt." "There ain't no money. We spent all the cash we had on lawyers," she managed to say, before the pistol came down and struck her a vicious blow in the face. Pain exploded on the side of her head like she had never felt before. Then she could feel hands lifting her back up to her feet. For a moment, she wondered why she had fallen so easily. A male voice came through the fog that was trying to envelop her. "Now, little sis, we know you got the stuff somewhere in this joint, so just set it out." The voice brought her back to reality. They wanted the little bit of money she had put up. She opened her eyes and saw the tall man leering down in her face. "Where is it, girl? Don't try and be hard. Just set it out," he said, then slapped her across the face. She raised her hand and pointed at George. "I gave him the dope last night, and he ain't brought no money back yet." Both of the stick-up men laughed. "Yeah, there sure was some good dope you gave to old..." Sandra knew the man was lying, but if she refused to give up the dope, there was no telling how far the men would go. She raised her hand and was surprised to feel blood running down the side of her face. "Even if I gave you the rest of the dope, you wouldn't bring back enough money to pay my rent here, let alone enough for us to try and cop some more stuff with," she replied, fighting for time, trying to think of a way out. The two men smiled at each other. "Don't you worry about it, little sis. Just give up the dope," the one called Tree said. For a minute she hesitated. If she didn't do what they asked, she reasoned, they would use force. Okay, she said. "Look in the closet, down in a red pair of shoes in the toe. It's all that's left," she added. Tree had already rushed off. He came back out of the bedroom, grinning, carrying the dope. "Now," he said as he approached her, "all you got to do is tell us where the money is. Then we'll leave you all alone." It seemed as if her world was falling down around her. She had tried, but it hadn't worked. If there was one thing she was determined to do, and that was hold on to the money at all costs. "There ain't no money," she stated. "If there had been, do you think I'd have taken a chance on giving him some dope?" She pointed at George, then added, "I must have needed money badly to take a chance like that." She noticed the men hesitate and glance at each other undecidedly. They had no way of knowing if she had any money or not, she reasoned. Tree moved suddenly. He stepped up and ripped her gown down around her waist. She opened her eyes and saw that she was half naked. Damn, girl, you ain't got no tits. But you is kind of young. If you don't want to be gorged, you better come up with that money. Wait, she pleaded. You ain't got to do nothing. If there was any money here, I'd have given it to you when I told you where the dope was. God damn it, bitch. Tree cursed. We don't want no story. We want the cash. Nothing else. He slapped her across the face, then added, either give it up or pay the consequences. Whatever they were going to do, she reasoned, they'd do whether she gave up the money or not. I tell you, she cried out. I gave you everything I had when I told you where the stuff was. Please, don't you understand? I just don't have anything. Wait, she added. I might have $20 or so in my pocketbook, but that's all the money I have to live on until payday. I believe her, Tree's partner said. I don't think you have any bread, man. Tree shrugged his shoulders as he stared at her young body. Fuck it, he exclaimed, then reached down and ripped her nightgown completely off. He stared at her young right body. I want some of this young pussy anyway. George managed to mutter something for the first time since they entered the place. Tree turned on him in anger. Fuck you, punk! Bitch ain't gonna tell the police nothing. If she gets fucked, she gets fucked, and that's it. What's she gonna say? We come in and robbed her of her dope, then fucked her? It's rape, man. It's rape, George finally stated loudly. I didn't get into this shit for no pussy, man. Fuck that shit. I got all the cock I know how to handle at home. Well, go home and fuck it then, Tree replied coldly. Hey, Fred, cook up one of them bags of dope, man. If we gonna trim the young sister, we might as well make it good to her. Ain't no sense in us coming too soon, he said. And both the men burst out laughing. Fred slowly removed the outfit and cooker from his sock. He bit off the end of one of the balloons, but found another knot in the balloon. After biting that one off, he dumped part of the dope in the cooker. Don't put too much of that stuff in the cooker. It's good dope that ain't been cut to death, Fred. Plus, man, we want to be able to get the old bone hard enough to please Miss Lady. Sandra stared around wildly. She knew now that the men intended to rape her. She opened her mouth to scream, but Tree caught her in time. He jammed his hand over her mouth